I'll never forget the look on Emily's face when the police officer handed me that court order. Her eyes, the same eyes I'd soothed to sleep so many nights when she was little, now looked at me cold, distant, like I was a stranger, as if 32 years of sacrifice, love, and dedication meant absolutely nothing. My name is Sarah Miller. I'm 68 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I lived in the house I built with my late husband, Michael. The house where I raised my only daughter. The house I foolishly signed over to her believing I was securing her future. The house she kicked me out of with just 2 bags of belongings and my old dog, Lucky. But there's something Emily doesn't know, a detail that would change everything. Let me tell you how I got here. It all started 15 months ago. I was sitting in the living room looking at old photographs of Michael. It had been 5 years since cancer took him, but his absence still hurt like the first day. Emily came to visit me that Sunday like she usually did every couple of weeks. She sat next to me and noticed the tears I was trying to hide. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, taking my hand in hers. I smiled at her, wiping my cheeks. "Just thinking about your father, sweetie. You know these days are always hard." Emily nodded and hugged me. Then, as if she'd been thinking about it for a long time, she looked at me seriously. "Mom, I've been worried about you. You live alone in this big house. What if you fall? What if something happens and nobody knows?" Her concern touched me. Since Michael passed away, she had been my rock, my support, even though she lived in her own apartment across town. "I'm fine, honey. I have Lucky and the neighbors come over for coffee every afternoon. You don't have to worry so much." Emily shook her head, her expression growing more serious. "It's not just that, Mom. This house needs a lot of maintenance. The roof needs repairs, the pipes are old. If something major breaks, how will you pay for it on your pension?" I couldn't deny she was right. The house was over 30 years old, and every winter new leaks would appear. Michael had always taken care of the repairs, but since his death, everything had become more complicated. My pension barely covered the basic necessities, and the money from Michael's life insurance had been used up paying for his medical treatments. "I've been thinking about something," Emily continued. "What if you put the house in my name? That way I could handle all the expenses, the repairs, the property taxes. You would keep living here, of course. Nothing would change in your day-to-day life. I would just take care of everything else." I looked at her surprised. I didn't expect that proposal. "But honey, this house is your inheritance. It will be yours anyway when I'm gone." "Exactly, Mom. But if we wait, you'll have to go through all the probate paperwork. Inheritance taxes are higher. Besides, if we do it now, I can start investing in improving the house. Think about it. A new roof, pipes that don't leak, maybe even that central heating system you always wanted." I have to admit the offer sounded tempting. The winters were getting harder on me with my arthritis getting worse, and the thought of not having to worry about home maintenance was a relief. "I don't know, Emily. This house is all I have." "Mom," she said, taking my hands, "trust me, it's just a legal formality. You'll keep living here for as long as you want. I promise you." Her eyes shone with a sincerity that disarmed me. This was my Emily, the little girl I had raised with so much love, the woman in whom I had placed all my hopes. How could I not trust her? "Okay," I finally agreed. "I'll talk to a lawyer." Emily smiled widely and hugged me. "Don't worry about a thing, Mom. I'll take care of all the paperwork. I know an excellent lawyer." And that's how it all started. In the following weeks, Emily took care of every detail. She would bring me documents to sign. She explained every step of the process. Or so I thought. I signed so many papers, I honestly lost track. I trusted my daughter completely. A month later, Emily gave me the news. The house was officially in her name. We celebrated with a special dinner, and she made a toast to a secure future. I remember feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. My daughter would take care of everything, and I could live in peace. The first few weeks after the transfer, everything seemed normal. Emily even came to visit more often than before. She brought workers to fix the roof, just as she had promised. She replaced the pipes in the main bathroom. She even hired a gardener to get the backyard in order. It was then that I met Derek. Emily brought him to dinner one Friday. Tall blonde with a perfect smile and a flawless suit. At first glance, he seemed like the perfect son-in-law. Derek is a real estate investor. Emily explained as he poured the wine they had brought. "We met at a finance conference 3 months ago. I remember thinking it was strange that Emily had never mentioned him before, but the way they looked at each other made me think it was recent and serious." "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Miller," Derek said, shaking my hand firmly. "Emily has told me so much about you. She says you're the strongest woman she knows." His words flattered me, but there was something in his eyes that unsettled me, a calculating coldness that clashed with his perfect smile. I tried to ignore that feeling, blaming it on my motherly jealousy. After all, Emily seemed happy, and that was all that mattered. Derek quickly became a part of our lives. He came with Emily almost every Sunday. He was charming, attentive, always bringing small gifts, chocolates, flowers, once even a collar for Lucky. And yet something inside me remained on alert whenever he was around. It was during one of those Sunday visits that Emily broke the news. They were engaged. She showed me a ring with a diamond so big it looked fake. They had only been dating for 4 months. "Don't you think it's too soon, honey?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Emily looked at me, irritated. "Mom, when you know you found the right person, you just know. You and Dad got married after only 6 months, remember?" It was true, but times were different. Michael and I were young, almost naive. Emily was 32 with a successful career as an accountant. I expected her to be more cautious. "I just want to make sure you know what you're doing," I insisted. Derek stepped in then with that smile that never reached his eyes. "I understand your concern, Mrs. Miller. It's natural for you to want to protect your daughter, but I promise you my intentions are serious. I love Emily, and I want to build a future with her." I nodded, not knowing what else to say. Emily seemed so in love, so happy. Who was I to ruin that moment? The wedding was 2 months later, a small ceremony in a beautiful garden. Emily was radiant in her white dress, and I cried as expected. Part of me cried with joy seeing my daughter so happy. Another part, a part I tried to ignore, cried from a sense of loss I couldn't explain. After the wedding, Emily's visits became less frequent. She always had an excuse, work social events with Derek being tired. We went from visits every 2 weeks to once a month, then every 6 weeks. When I called, Derek would often answer telling me Emily was busy and that he'd have her call me back, calls that were rarely returned. I also started noticing changes in my house. One day I came home from shopping and found a man taking measurements in the backyard. When I asked what he was doing, he told me Emily had hired him to appraise the property. Another time I opened the door to a fancy couple who said they had an appointment to see the house for sale. I explained there must be a mistake, that my house was not for sale. They left confused, showing me a listing on their phones. My house listed at an exorbitant price. I called Emily immediately. She assured me it was a mistake, that Derek had been looking at similar properties to invest in, and someone had mixed up the addresses. She told me not to worry, but the strange visits continued. And every time I questioned Emily, she had a perfectly reasonable explanation, always blaming some administrative error or misunderstanding. 6 months after the wedding, on a Sunday morning, Emily and Derek showed up at my door unannounced. Emily was wearing an expensive coat I'd never seen before. Derek had that cold smile that now sent a chill down my spine. "Mom, we need to talk," Emily said, walking in without waiting for an invitation. They sat in my living room, the same room where we had shared so much laughter and so many secrets. Now, however, the air was tense, as if they were strangers visiting unknown territory. "We've decided to move into this house," Emily announced without any preamble. I looked at her confused. "Move here?" "Yes, Mom. Derek and I need more space. His apartment is too small. And since this house is already in my name, it makes sense for us to move in here." I felt the floor shift beneath my feet. "But this is my house, Emily. We agreed that I would keep living here." Emily and Derek exchanged a look. It was he who spoke in that smooth, controlled voice that now made my skin crawl. "Mrs. Miller, we understand this is difficult for you, but legally this house belongs to Emily. Your arrangement was verbal, wasn't it? Emily," my voice trembled, "you promised me." "Mom," she cut me off with a tone I had never heard from her before. Circumstances have changed. Derek and I are going to have a baby. We need this house." The news that would have filled me with joy under any other circumstance now hit me like a stab wound. A grandchild. Emily was pregnant and using it to throw me out of my own home. "Congratulations," I managed to say, tears welling up in my eyes. "But this house is big. We can all live together. The guest room can be the baby's room. And I can help with—" "That won't work," Derek cut in. "Emily and I need our space. Besides, this house needs major renovations before the baby arrives. It would be better if we found another solution for you." "Another solution?" My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "What do you mean?" Emily pulled some brochures from her purse and spread them on the coffee table. "We've been looking into senior living facilities. There are several very nice ones with 24-hour medical care. You'd have more company social activities." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own daughter, who I had given everything to, was trying to send me to a nursing home. "I'm not going to any facility," I said with a firmness I didn't know I still had. "This is my house. Michael and I built it brick by brick. My only daughter was born here. My husband died here. I'm not leaving." Emily sighed as if she were dealing with a stubborn child. "Mom, be reasonable. The house is in my name. Legally, I can do whatever I want with it. You promised me I could stay here as long as I wanted. You promised me Emily." Derek stood up, visibly impatient. "Mrs. Miller, I understand your attachment to this house, but you have to understand that it's now Emily's property. We are offering you a dignified alternative in a luxury facility. Many people in your situation—" "In my situation." The rage was starting to replace the initial shock. "And what is my situation exactly, Derek?" Being a naive old woman who trusted her daughter, Emily stood up, too clearly annoyed. "This is getting us nowhere. We'll give you time to think about it, Mom. 1 week. After that, we expect you to have made a reasonable decision." They left as abruptly as they had arrived, leaving me sitting in my living room with the brochures for retirement homes and a shattered heart. I didn't sleep that night. I walked through the house that had been my home for 3 decades, touching the walls that held so many memories. Emily's room, where I had rocked her to sleep so many nights. The kitchen where Michael and I used to dance while we cooked dinner. The backyard where we had celebrated every birthday, every Christmas. How had it come to this? At what point had my sweet Emily turned into this cold, calculating woman capable of throwing her own mother out on the street? I spent the next few days in a daze, unable to process what was happening. I called Emily several times, but I only managed to speak with Derek, who insisted he would give her the message. On the 5th day, just as I was starting to consider my options, none of which included a retirement home, my doorbell rang. It was a police officer accompanied by a man in a suit who identified himself as Emily's lawyer. "Mrs. Miller," the lawyer said, handing me an envelope. "This is a court order. You have 48 hours to vacate the property. Any personal belongings remaining in the house after that deadline will be considered abandoned." "No." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "There must be a mistake," I stammered. "This is my house." The lawyer shook his head. "The property is registered in the name of Emily Bennett. She has filed an eviction lawsuit claiming that you are illegally occupying her property. The judge has ruled in her favor." As the man spoke, I saw Emily's car pull up in front of the house. She got out with that cold expression that now seemed to be her natural state. Behind her, Derek was smiling subtly. "Emily." She didn't even look me in the eye. "Asateke." 48 hours, Mom. You can take your personal effects. The rest stays." "Where am I supposed to go?" Emily took a piece of paper from her purse. "I've booked a room for you at the Buena Vista residence. It's paid for 3 months, enough time for you to adjust and find a permanent arrangement." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Why, Emily? Why are you doing this to me?" For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, but it lasted only a second before Derek placed his hand on her shoulder as if reminding her of something. "The house is worth a lot, Mom. With the money from the sale, Derek and I can buy something better in a more exclusive neighborhood, something worthy of our son." You're going to sell your childhood home, the house where you grew up. Emily shrugged. It's just bricks, Mom. And speaking of which, we need you to give us the keys right now. The police officer, visibly uncomfortable, intervened. Ma'am, you don't need to hand over the keys now. The order gives you 48 hours. Derek stepped forward. But we would be more at ease if you handed them over now for security. Security? My voice sounded hoarse, strange. Do you think I'm going to damage my own house? It's not your house anymore, Mom, Emily said coldly. And frankly, we don't know how you're going to react. At that moment, Lucky started barking from inside the house, sensing my distress. Emily made a gesture of annoyance. And you'll have to take that dog. We can't keep him. It was that sentence more than anything else that showed me how much my daughter had changed. Lucky had been her playmate throughout her childhood. She had picked him out herself at the shelter when she was 8. How could she talk about him as if he were a piece of old furniture? I'll take Lucky, don't you worry, I said with a calm I didn't feel. And I'll be gone in 48 hours, as the order says. But I want you to know, Emily, that one day you will regret this. Not for my sake, but for yours, because the day you treat your own child like this, you will remember this moment. I saw a flash of pain in her eyes, but it was Derek who responded. Don't threaten my wife, Mrs. Miller. You have the court order. 48 hours. They left the police officer and the lawyer following them, leaving me alone on the porch of what was no longer my house. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of emotions and activity. How do you pack up 30 years of life in 2 days? What do you take when you can only carry what fits in 2 suitcases? I took the photographs, of course, Michael's letters, the small treasures that were worthless to anyone else but for me. They held a lifetime. The blanket my mother knitted, my father's pocket watch, the first Mother's Day card Emily ever made me with her little handprints in pink paint. Lucky watched me pack confused, as if he understood something terrible was happening. At 12 years old, he was too old for so much uncertainty, just like me. I called Linda, Michael's sister. She lived in another city, a 2-hour drive away, but she was the only family I had left. I explained the situation through tears. Come home, Sarah, she said without hesitation. You can stay with me for as long as you need, and bring Lucky, of course. Her kindness only made me cry harder. I don't want to be a burden, Linda. You could never be a burden. You're my sister even if Michael is no longer with us. Family is family. Words that apparently my own daughter had forgotten. I spent the last night in my house sitting on the back porch watching the stars with Lucky at my feet. It was the same view I had looked at for 30 years, the same sky under which Michael and I had dreamed of a future, the same garden where Emily had taken her first steps. Tomorrow, all of this would belong to someone else, to my daughter, who had decided that the house's real estate value was more important than the memories it held, more important than me. At dawn, I put the last few things in my suitcase. A taxi was waiting to take me to the bus station. I paused for a moment at the front door, allowing myself one last look. Come on, Lucky, I said in a voice I barely recognized as my own. It's time to go. Just as I was closing the door, I saw Emily's car approaching. She and Derek were coming to make sure I really left, I suppose. I saw my daughter get out of the car impeccably dressed as always. Our eyes met for a moment. I thought that maybe at the last minute she would reconsider, that the daughter I had raised with so much love would come back to me, but she simply took out her phone and started talking to someone, turning her back on me. Derek watched me from the car with that cold smile I now understood so well. The taxi driver put my 2 suitcases in the trunk. I helped Lucky get into the back seat. That was it. 30 years of life reduced to 2 suitcases and an old dog. Where to, ma'am? The driver asked. To the bus station, I replied without looking back. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. As the taxi pulled away, I remembered the words of Emily's lawyer. The property is registered in the name of Emily Bennett. She has filed an eviction lawsuit claiming that you are illegally occupying her property. And then I remembered something else. Something Emily and Derek didn't know. Something that would change everything. The journey to Linda's house was long and quiet. Lucky slept on my lap, oblivious to the storm of emotions consuming me. rage, pain, disappointment, but above all a determination I hadn't felt in a long time, because there was something Emily and Derek didn't know, something that had been forgotten in the whirlwind of events. When I arrived at Linda's house, she was waiting for me at the door. She hugged me tightly without asking questions and led me inside. Her house was small but cozy, so different from the one I had just lost. She set me up in her guest room and let me rest. That night, after a dinner I barely touched, I told her everything. How Emily had convinced me to put the house in her name, how she had changed after meeting Derek, the court order, the 48 hours, the humiliation of being thrown out of my own home. Linda listened in silence, her expression changing from disbelief to outrage. "Sarah," she said finally, "do you remember when you decided to put the house in Emily's name? Do you remember that Michael had a lawyer friend, David Cole?" I nodded slowly. David had been Michael's friend since college. He had been at our wedding at Emily's baptism. After Michael's death, he had come to visit me several times, offering his help with legal matters. "You spoke with him before you signed anything, right?" Linda insisted. "Yes," I suddenly remembered. "David told me not to sign anything without him reviewing it, and then Emily brought the papers and—" I paused, remembering something else. David had insisted on reviewing the documents before I signed. I had called him to tell him about Emily's proposal. He had warned me to be careful to include clauses that would protect me. "David added something to the documents," I said slowly, the memories coming back. "A clause the right of a life estate," Linda completed, smiling for the first time that night. "I remember because Michael and I talked about it when he was sick. David recommended that if you ever transferred the property to Emily, you should secure your right to live there until you die." I was silent, processing the information. Was it possible there was a clause in the documents that gave me the right to live in the house, regardless of who owned it? "But the court order," I started. "Emily and that husband of hers probably know nothing about that clause," Linda said. "I bet neither of them bothered to read the original documents. And if the lawyer they hired didn't do his job properly—" A small flame of hope ignited within me. "I need to call David." Linda looked at her watch. "It's late, but we'll call him first thing in the morning. Get some rest now. Tomorrow is a new day." That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. The next morning, Linda woke me up with coffee and some news. She had located David and briefly explained the situation to him. He was expecting us at his office at 10. We arrived on time. David, now with more gray hair, but the same kind smile I remembered, greeted us with a hug. "Sarah, I am so sorry about all this," he said, motioning for us to sit. "Linda has given me some details, but I need you to tell me exactly what happened." Over the next hour, I told him everything. Emily's proposal, the documents I signed the wedding with Derek, the changes in her behavior, and finally, the eviction order. David took notes, his expression growing more and more serious. When I finished, he took off his glasses and looked at me directly. "Sarah, do you remember I insisted on reviewing all the documents before you signed them?" I nodded. "Yes, you came to the house and we went over them together." "Exactly. And I added a specific clause, a life estate. It means that even though the property is in Emily's name, you have the legal right to live there until you die. It's a right that cannot be revoked, not even by the property owner. So the court order is invalid. It's completely invalid," David affirmed firmly. "The judge who issued it likely had no knowledge of this clause. Emily and her lawyer must have only presented the property title without mentioning the life estate. That's procedural fraud." A mixture of relief and rage washed over me. "Can I get my house back?" "Not only can you, Sarah, you must. What Emily has done is illegal. We need to act quickly before they sell the property." The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal activity. David filed a lawsuit against Emily and Derek, alleging procedural fraud and violation of my rights as a life tenant. He also requested an injunction to prevent them from selling the house while the case was being resolved. I stayed with Linda the entire time. Her unconditional support was the only thing that kept me afloat. Her and Lucky, who seemed to have grown younger, in the large backyard of her house. A month later, we received the news. The judge had ruled in our favor. The eviction order was nullified and my right to a life estate on the property was recognized. "What does this mean exactly?" I asked David when we met to discuss the ruling. "It means, Sarah, that you can go back to your house. Legally, you have the right to live there until the end of your days. Emily is still the owner, but she cannot prevent you from living in the house or sell it to anyone without respecting your life estate." "And what if they refuse?" Linda asked, always practical. David smiled a smile that reminded me so much of Michael, it almost made me cry. "If they refuse, we'll have to enforce the judgment with the help of the police if necessary." I couldn't help a small smile of satisfaction. The idea of returning to my house, of reclaiming my home, filled me with a joy I hadn't felt in weeks. "When can we do it?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning," David replied. "I've coordinated with the court. An officer will come with us to execute the judgment." I barely slept that night, but for the first time it wasn't from anguish, but from anticipation. Lucky seemed to sense my excitement. He didn't leave my side all night. The next morning, David came to pick up Linda and me. Lucky rode in the back seat, his head sticking out the window, like when he was a puppy. On the way, David explained what we could expect. "Emily and Derek will probably be surprised. They may react with hostility. Let me handle the legal part. The officer is there to ensure everything proceeds peacefully." I nodded, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. I didn't know how I would react seeing Emily after everything that had happened. A part of me was still hurt, betrayed. Another part, the mother I would always be longed for, a reconciliation I knew was unlikely. When we arrived at the house, my heart skipped a beat. There was a "for sale" sign on the front lawn. Derek was outside talking to what looked like a real estate agent. They both turned as they saw our car pull up. Derek's face went from surprise to anger in a matter of seconds. He said something to the agent and quickly walked over to our car. "What are you doing here?" he snapped as we got out. David took the lead, introducing himself and handing him a copy of the court judgment. "Mr. Bennett, we are here to execute this judgment. Mrs. Miller has a life estate on this property, and we are going to reinstate her today." Derek looked at the document as if it were a poisonous snake. "This is ridiculous. We own this house legally." "Your wife acquired the property," David corrected, "but with a clear life estate clause in favor of Mrs. Miller, a clause you conveniently forgot to mention when you requested the eviction order." At that moment, the police officer accompanying us stepped in. "Sir, I have orders to ensure this judgment is enforced. Please provide access to Mrs. Miller, or I will have to report obstruction of justice." Derek looked around as if searching for a way out. Finally, he took out his phone. "I'm calling my lawyer and Emily." "Go ahead," David said calmly. "In the meantime, we are going to proceed." The real estate agent, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, muttered something about coming back later and left quickly. We walked toward the front door, Lucky trotting faithfully by my side. I felt a wave of emotions as I stepped back onto the porch I had swept so many times, where I had spent so many evenings with Michael watching the sunset. Derek followed us, talking heatedly on the phone. I could hear snippets. "Your mother, a lawyer, life estate, police." The officer asked me if I had keys. I shook my head. Emily had taken them from me on the day of the eviction. He rang the doorbell. No one answered. "The house seems empty," Linda commented. Derek finished his call and walked over, visibly upset. "Emily is on her way, my lawyer, too. This is a mistake." "There is no mistake, Mr. Bennett," the officer said firmly. "I have a valid court judgment. Do you have the keys to the property?" Derek hesitated, but finally pulled a set of keys from his pocket. "This is an outrage," he muttered as he reluctantly opened the door. Entering my house after a month's absence was like breathing again after being underwater. Despite the obvious changes, new furniture, freshly painted walls, the smell, the light coming through the windows, everything felt familiar, a part of me. Lucky ran inside excitedly, sniffing every corner, recognizing his territory. I smiled, seeing him so happy. "All right," the officer said, consulting some papers. "According to the judgment, Mrs. Miller has the right to reside in this property without interference. Mr. Bennett, are there any belongings of yours or your wife's that you wish to remove now?" Derek seemed surprised by the question. Remove? This is our house. We've done renovations, bought new furniture. The furniture and improvements can stay, David intervened. Mrs. Miller is only claiming her right to live here, not the ownership of the personal property you have acquired. This is absurd. Derek was shifting from disbelief to fury. You expect us to leave all our furniture, our things, and just leave? You can take your personal effects, David clarified calmly, but anything that is part of the house, like fixed furniture, appliances, and the like, must remain. It's part of the life estate. Derek was about to reply when we heard a car park abruptly outside. Moments later, Emily burst into the house, followed by a man in a suit I assumed was her lawyer. Our eyes met, and for an instant I saw my little girl again. The girl who ran into my arms when she scraped her knees, the teenager who cried on my shoulder over a broken heart, the young woman who had hugged me at Michael's funeral, promising we would always be together. But the moment passed, and the woman in front of me had cold, calculating eyes. Eyes she had inherited not from me, but from her father. Michael had always had that look when he was furious. "What is going on here?" Emily demanded. Her lawyer, who had already taken the judgment from Derek's hands, stepped in. "Mrs. Bennett, it appears there is a life estate clause in favor of your mother in the original property transfer agreement." "A what?" Emily looked at me accusingly, as if I had laid a trap. "A life estate," her lawyer repeated, visibly uncomfortable. "It means your mother has the legal right to live on this property until her death, regardless of who the owner is." Emily turned pale. "That's impossible. We checked all the documents." "Apparently not carefully enough," David murmured. "I'm going to fight this," Emily said, snatching the papers from her lawyer. "There must be some mistake, some way to invalidate it." Emily's lawyer, a young man who looked increasingly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Bennett, if I may." He took the judgment and studied it carefully. Then he took out his tablet and looked something up. Finally, he looked up with a grave expression. "A life estate is a real property right that cannot be unilaterally revoked. If it's in the original contract and your mother did not expressly waive it." "She gave us the house," Emily exclaimed. "I gave you the title," I corrected, finding my voice for the first time since she had walked in. "But I never gave up my right to live here, something I explained clearly when I agreed to put the house in your name." Emily looked at me as if she wanted to erase me from existence. Then she turned to her lawyer. "There must be something we can do." The man shook his head. "We can appeal, but frankly, if the life estate is clearly established in the original contract, our chances are very slim." Derek, who had been unusually quiet, exploded. "This is ridiculous. We bought this house to sell it. We already have offers." The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place in my mind. "You never wanted to live here, did you? That whole story about the baby, about needing more space? It was just to get me out so you could sell the house." Emily had the decency to look ashamed, though only for a moment. "The house is in an area that has appreciated enormously. It's a good investment." "A good investment?" I repeated, incredulous. "Kicking your mother out of her home is a good investment," Derek interrupted. "Sentimentality doesn't pay the bills, Mrs. Miller. This house can be sold for 3 times what it was worth when you bought it." "And that money is exactly what you need to pay off your gambling debts, isn't it, Derek?" I said, remembering the whispered conversations I had overheard between them, the mysterious calls, his growing nervousness. Derek's expression confirmed I had hit the nail on the head. Emily looked at him surprised. "What is he talking about, Derek?" "Don't listen to her," he said quickly. "Your mother is making things up to turn us against each other." But Emily was no longer looking at him with the same adoration. A shadow of doubt had appeared in her eyes. The police officer who had been watching silently intervened. "I think we've established that Mrs. Miller has the right to reside here. I suggest you resolve your family matters in private. My duty is to ensure the judgment is carried out today." Emily looked at her lawyer, who nodded resignedly. "Legally, your mother has the right to be here. We can appeal, but in the meantime, the judgment must be obeyed." "This isn't over," Emily warned me, grabbing her purse. "Let's go, Derek." Derek looked like he was about to argue, but something in Emily's expression stopped him. With one last glare in my direction, he followed his wife outside. Once we were alone, David, Linda, the officer, and I looked at each other in silence for a moment. Then, unable to hold it in, I sat down on the sofa, a new one I didn't recognize, and broke down in tears. Tears of relief, of pain, of bitter triumph. Linda sat next to me, hugging me. Lucky jumped onto the sofa and rested his head on my lap, as he had done thousands of times before. "You're home, Sarah," Linda whispered. "You're home." The officer said goodbye, promising to return if there were any problems. David stayed a while longer explaining the legal details of the situation. Emily was still the owner of the house, but I had the right to live there until I died. They couldn't force me to leave, nor could they sell the house without mentioning my life estate to the buyer, which made the house practically unsellable. "You've won, Sarah," David said before he left. "Now try to rebuild your life." Easier said than done. The following days were strange. The house was changed. Emily and Derek had almost completely redecorated, throwing out many of my old pieces of furniture, the ones that held so many memories. The walls had been painted in neutral, modern, and cold tones. The garden, my pride and joy, had been turned into a minimalist space with stones and a few exotic plants. But underneath all those changes, it was still my house. The pipes still made that characteristic noise when the hot water was turned on. The third step still creaked in the same way. The evening light still came through the kitchen window, illuminating everything with that golden glow that Michael had loved so much. Linda stayed with me that first week, helping me reorganize the little I had brought back. We placed the photographs in new spots, adapting to the changes, but reclaiming the space as my own again. Emily and Derek didn't come back, nor did they call. Their silence was deafening, but also a relief. I needed time to process everything that had happened to heal. One morning, 2 weeks after my return, as I was having breakfast in the kitchen, the doorbell rang. It was Emily, alone. She looked different, less haughty, more like the daughter I remembered. "Can I come in?" she asked in a soft voice. I hesitated for a moment, but finally stepped aside, letting her in. Lucky, who normally greeted any visitor, effusively kept his distance, watching her cautiously. We sat in the kitchen in an uncomfortable silence. Finally, Emily spoke. "Derek is gone," she said simply. I looked at her, waiting for more of an explanation. "You were right," she continued. "The gambling debts were worse than I imagined. $500,000 to dangerous loan sharks. That's why he was so desperate to sell this house." I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected upon hearing my suspicions, confirmed only a deep sadness for my daughter. "Where is he now?" I asked. Emily shrugged. "I don't know. He left a note. Said he got money from another source and that he needed time to get his life together." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Emily looked at me with surprise. "You're sorry? After everything we did to you?" "You're my daughter," I said simply. "Your pain will always be my pain." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve for you to be so good to me." I didn't answer. It was true. She didn't deserve it. But a mother's love doesn't work in terms of deserving or not. "And the baby?" I asked after a moment, remembering the excuse they had used to kick me out. Emily looked down. "There is no baby. There never was. It was Derek's idea to make you feel guilty if you resisted." The calculated cruelty of that lie hurt me more than anything else. To play with something as sacred as a grandchild. But I said nothing. What was there left to say? "I'm going to file for divorce," Emily continued. "And I'm going to try to make things right, starting with giving you the house back." I looked at her, surprised. "That's not necessary." "It is," she insisted. "I never should have agreed to this plan. It was a terrible mistake, unforgivable." "Nothing is unforgivable between a mother and a daughter," I said softly. Victoria broke down crying then, with sobs that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. I got up and hugged her, feeling her body tremble against mine, just like when she was little and had nightmares. "I'm sorry, Mom," she repeated through her tears. "I'm so sorry." I forgave her, of course. Not immediately, not completely. But I started that day. The road to reconciliation would be long, full of difficult conversations and wounds that would take time to heal. Emily had betrayed my trust in the worst possible way, and that's not easily forgotten. But she was my daughter, the little one I had rocked to sleep, the girl whose scrapes I had cleaned, the young woman whose tears I had dried. A mother's love is perhaps the most resilient force in the universe. 6 months later, the house was legally back in my name. Emily insisted as part of her process of making amends. Derek disappeared completely from our lives, though occasionally rumors would surface about his new troubles in another city. Emily and I began a new relationship, more mature, more honest. She moved back to her apartment, but she came to visit regularly, not out of obligation, but by choice. Slowly we rebuilt our trust. A year after my return, we were sitting on the back porch looking at the garden we had replanted together, restoring it to its former glory. Lucky was dozing at our feet now, a very old but happy dog. "Do you know what hurt the most?" I asked Emily, feeling that we could finally talk about it without the pain being unbearable. She looked at me expectant. "It wasn't losing the house. It was losing you, seeing who you had become." Emily nodded with tears in her eyes. "I know, and that's what I'll never fully forgive myself for. Not the court order, not the lies, but betraying everything you taught me about love, family, integrity." I took her hand. "But you came back. You chose the right path in the end. Thanks to you," she said, "to your strength, your dignity, to that detail. We forgot to check in the documents." I smiled, remembering the look on Emily's face when she discovered I had the legal right to stay in the house. "The life estate, your father's foresight through David." "Dad always looked out for us even after he was gone," Emily murmured. "Yes," I agreed, looking at the sky that was beginning to turn orange. "Always." That night after Emily left, I stayed on the porch with Lucky for a while longer. The house was mine again legally, and in every way that mattered. My daughter had come back to me not as the person manipulated by Derek, but as the Emily I had raised. Life had taken a lot from me, Michael, too soon, almost my home, and temporarily my daughter. But it had also given me back so much. My dignity, my house, my rebuilt family. And it had taught me an invaluable lesson. That even in the darkest moments when it seems like you've lost everything, there's always a detail, small but crucial, that can change everything. In my case, it was a legal clause that Derek and Emily overlooked, but it was also my inner strength, the one I didn't know I had until I was forced to use it. Today, sitting on the porch of the house, I almost lost with the daughter I almost lost, and the dog that never left my side. I am at peace. This is my house, my home, and no one will ever take it from me again.